Here at Capcoder, we are delighted to introduce our new and revolutionary all-electric machine. Based on our best-selling Micro Mono, the Micro Mono E eliminates the need for compressed air to operate. And with options such as automatic bottle in-feed, integrated filling, and automatic cap placement, it makes the Micro Mono E unique in the industry. Ideally suited for ultra-clean rooms wanting to eliminate any potential contamination of compressed air, or areas where compressed air is not available. The Micro Mono E requires only a standard 13 amp plug to operate. The all-electric version still excels anywhere from small batch work to high output production. Capcoder are excited to demonstrate their bestseller, the Micro Mono benchtop filling and capping machine. With unparalleled ease of use, flexibility, and a multitude of configurations, from fully manual to fully automatic operation, the Micro Mono truly does stand in a league of its own. Using the same control system as our flagship monoblock, it allows us to incorporate sophisticated technology such as load cells, precision sensors, and torque transducers. It can be integrated with a number of different style fillers, and as well as standard capping, can accommodate styles such as trigger sprays, press-on, and even crimp capping. Originally designed for customers that have a frequent product changeover, the Micro Mono takes advantage of quick release tooling, meaning product changeover can take as little as 2 minutes.
Welcome back to CBD Live Europe 2021. This is the Integro Clinics patient panel. My name is Alex Fraser. I'm patient access lead at Grow Pharma, and I'll be comparing the panel today. And on the panel, we have some fantastic guests. We have 3 patients who are at Integro Clinics currently, and we also have the clinic nurse at Integro as well. So I'm going to introduce everyone one by one, and I'm going to go straight into the questions. I think if we can, if you're happy to, guys, if you tell me a little bit about yourself, obviously tell us who you are, and if you tell us how you discovered medical cannabis, and we'll sort of go from there. And I'm going to pick on Terry first, if that's all right, Terry.
How did I know you would pick on me first? Okay, my name's Terry. Brief description, I have had cancer on and off since I was 30. And unfortunately, it came back when about 4 years ago now, 4.5 years ago. And I had tried cannabis beforehand to help with the sickness when I was 30. But obviously there was no really such thing as medical cannabis. It was more through a friend of a friend and dropping things through the post for you. And then actually in lockdown, we'd found out that the cancer was no longer curable. And I had spoken to my oncologist at the time, and he said there was nothing more he could do for me apart from chemotherapy, which for me wasn't good enough. So I started looking at alternative oncologists, but also alternative medicines. And I remembered seeing something about cannabis. So I reached out to a friend who grew her own because she had lung cancer many years ago. And she started supplying me with cannabis that she was growing herself. And it really did help with the sickness. The problem with that is that you can't control it. And it always, because I had at the time a 1-year-old, I was very aware that the THC levels were so high, I couldn't take anything during the day, which meant the sickness when I needed to be around to feed my baby was so extreme that I had to take all these other medicines that then had all the other side effects, but I didn't want to take the cannabis. And when I was on chemotherapy, I became friends with somebody who actually is a patient at Integro, and she'd said, look, rather than trying that, why don't you try this instead? And that was in about November, December last year. And I've been using medical cannabis ever since. I take it during the day and during the evening for different reasons, and it's meant that I've managed to cope with the chemotherapy, the radiotherapy, the hospitalizations in a way that I don't have to have all this other medication that keeps me going. I can just use this instead, which is 1 less chemical, 3 less chemicals, or in some cases when I'm on chemotherapy, 7 less chemicals in my body that I just don't need.
Wow, that's fantastic. There's obviously a lot to unpack there, and we'll certainly come back to a few of the things that you touched on. I think it's really interesting that you have this experience of having done perhaps the less legal route, the illegal route, and then moving in and working with one of the clinics now to get to better health. And we're going to go to Jess now, and yeah, introduce yourself for us. And you're just on mute at the moment.
Hi, so my name is Jessica, and my route to medical cannabis was really that I had a nasty injury about 2 years ago. It was actually when I was skiing, and over about 6 to 8 months after the initial injury had happened, the pain got really worse and worse, and I found that I was taking industrial quantities of over-the-counter pain medicines. And I was also by this stage receiving steroid injections, which although they sort of initially helped, they were also a huge commitment because I had to be sedated before I had them, and it really sort of wiped out the whole day around going and getting one of these injections. And I had reached really the point with the pain that I was on the verge of going ahead with some, quite major surgery. It's called, I think, an anterior cervical discectomy, where they remove the damaged discs and they put in they put in plastic discs in a titanium case. So it was pretty daunting, and it was really just at this point where I was really almost there. I actually had heard a friend talk about medical cannabis, and then I watched one of Nurse Sophie's educational films on back pain and neck pain and how cannabis medicines can help. And I also knew that Integro clinics were endorsed also by Backcare, the National Back Pain Charity, which gave me some confidence that this was a legitimate thing worth trying. And I went to see Dr. Anthony Woodman, and from there it all really worked. It took a while to get the right prescription, but once we did, I found that I could maintain my lifestyle without having to resort to surgery.
Fantastic. And already we're getting a picture of the sort of different experiences of medical cannabis, and two very different experiences there, but both seeing huge improvements in terms of quality of life, which is fantastic to hear. Thirdly, we're going to introduce Mark.
Thanks, Alex. Yep, I'm Mark. I live in the sunny island of Guernsey. I was introduced to medicinal cannabis via Integro 3-4 months ago. I've always been a fan of the cannabis plant. I have self-medicated in the past before, so I was aware of the benefits that it could bring. In my role as a politician in Guernsey, I've tried to do as much as I can to open up access to medicinal cannabis for people and have some sort of level playing field of health equality, because at the moment it's only people that can afford medicinal cannabis, regardless if they need it more than the next person or not. But if they haven't got the £500 a month to spare, they're not going to get it, and we need to address that inequality. I came across Integro. It was recommended to me by a cousin of mine. I did a little bit of research and I contacted a few clinics. And luckily enough, in Guernsey, we have this Facebook page called Medicinal Cannabis Patients Group. And you can see everybody's experiences. And I spent some time before I committed to Integro to have a look through everyone's different experiences. And from what I can gather is Integro and IPS, the combination, are the best clinic and the best pharmacy from our experiences here in the Channel Islands.
Brilliant. Well, that leads on nicely to introducing Sophie Hayes. Sophie is the lead clinic nurse at Integro. She is also the clinical lead at medical cannabis advocacy organisation CPAS, and she happens to be my partner of 12 years as well, which hopefully she'll touch on a little bit in her introduction. So, Sophie.
Thank you, Alex. So I found myself in this role. It's been a very long and windy route to get to where I am now. Obviously, in 2010, Alex was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and that in itself was a long period of time before the diagnosis was given. But he obviously found that cannabis was helpful for his symptoms like nausea, pain, sleep, appetite stimulation, all of these things that I think, as being the person that I am, I wasn't just willing to accept that it was just as is. That I think we wanted to find out exactly with like how that worked and why that worked, and through that I found other patients and other carers who were experiencing very similar things, and we create the advocacy organisation United Patients Alliance in the UK, and for many, many years we did a lot of advocacy around the UK, where we educated not only the general public but politicians, and presented evidence to Parliament. We did protests, and the key thing that I've drawn from that experience to the role that I have now is we used to host patient events where patients would come up and, similar to this, sort of tell their story about how they had found cannabis had helped them, and often talked about the reactions that they had had with family members or from work or from housing and other situations that I'm sure Mark has come across doing what you do. I then just listening to these patients who sort of come to the conclusion that it was like backed up by evidence across the world, that it was something that was obviously legitimately helping them. And actually for me, it was very exciting as a clinician to find out that there was this potential for any number of conditions and symptoms to be managed with this medication. And that's something that I think when I've come to this role as a clinic nurse in this field, that we talk about a lot with other clinicians, be it nurses as part of my role at CPAS, or as with consultants as my role at Integro. So it's mostly the most exciting thing that they find is that they see hundreds and hundreds of patients with innumerable conditions that have just, as Jess said, reached the point where they're no longer able to manage it with the tools in their toolbox that they currently have. And what they seem to be most excited about when you talk to them about how it all works is that they will have another tool in their toolbox to offer their patients. And really the core of it is the fact they're able to help more people. And that's for me the most exciting thing. And that's how I've ended up where I am now.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And I think it's worth pointing out, I was meant to say towards the beginning, it's Integro is one of the clinics that's been set up to prescribe these cannabis medicines in the UK, but it's a very new field of medicine, and you touched on that a little bit, Sophie, there. So I think it'd be really interesting to talk about sort of our interactions or your interactions with patients as with talking to your various different clinicians that you work with. Terry, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about whether or not you felt comfortable speaking to your oncology team about what you were doing, and whether that changed between using cannabis illicitly and then using it with the clinic.
Yeah, sure. So the original oncologist that I had, whilst he was, I'm sure, very good, we found out that the cancer was incurable at the end of March last year. So just as lockdown had hit. So it was done over a Zoom call, and he'd said there's nothing more we can do. We can just give you chemotherapy for as long as you can take it. And I'd said to him, well, surely there's other routes that we can go down. And his response was, well, no, there isn't. This is what I can give you. And I'd suggested to him then, what about medical cannabis? I've read that it can help at least get me to tolerate the chemotherapy, the chemotherapy that I was having. Just so you're aware, I've got stage 4 incurable bowel and colorectal cancer that has travelled throughout my body over the past 18 months. His answer when I'd said that I was considering taking medical cannabis was, if you do this, I don't want you to be my patient anymore.
Wow, that's
And
an
I
interesting
said to
to say.
him, what happens if I was just taking cannabis? Because my friend has been sending it to me. She's had lung cancer. She's survived lung cancer. She has cannabis every single day. She grows it herself. She's gone vegan and she believes in the cannabis. She believes in her lifestyle. She believes that that is what is helping her. And his response was, I am an oncologist of 10 years. I have a medical field in this for as long as I have been trained. There is no scientific evidence that cannabis helps. I will not treat you if you use cannabis. So I made the decision there and then that that wasn't good enough for me, and I found somebody else that would. And when I did find that person, I actually came across him when we'd first found out that I had cancer in 2017 when it had returned. And his response to me was, whilst I do not know enough about cannabis, if it means that you do not have to take all this medication to get you through the day, if it means that you can eat something because you've got the hunger, if it means that you can sleep so that your body can heal, you do whatever it takes for you to get you through whatever we are putting you through. Because ultimately, chemotherapy is a poison and it is brutal. And the thought of just having that for the rest of my life, I couldn't do it. I'd said I needed to come up with another way. And actually, it was on my last round of chemotherapy that I came across somebody who is now my friend. And I was crying and I was very emotional. The fact that I was then going to be given a 6-week break, and then every 2 weeks for as long as I could manage it, that would be it forever. Until, and his words, until you cannot tolerate it anymore, and then you give up. And she'd said to me, there is another way. Medical cannabis really helps. It helps with the anxiety. I had anticipatory sickness, so I was having diazepam to even get me in the car to get me to hospital. I was having gabapentin to help with the muscle spasms that I was facing from all the aches and pains that I had. I've got peripheral neuropathy. I've got damage to my spine from all the radiotherapy that I've had. I can't tolerate a lot of food because of the sickness and the diarrhea that colorectal cancer and bowel cancer causes. So for me, the thought of an oncologist saying, if it helps you, then you do it. If it means you are having a natural product, instead of taking, we worked out at one point, I was taking 7 medications to just get me up in the morning. That's
Wow.
without the chemotherapy, that's without radiotherapy. 7 different tablets every morning to just get me out of bed so that I could see my daughter. And doing this, I don't need to do that anymore. And
That's
it's not going to cure my cancer, and I'm not going to be the person that says take cannabis because it cures cancer, because there isn't enough evidence on that. But what it does do is give you the strength and give you the time for your body to heal, for you to eat, for you to sleep, for you to rest and recover and not have that anxiety. That means you can face the next day, you can face the next hospital appointment. you can face the next chemotherapy, you can face the next scan, you can get up in the morning and help your daughter get ready for school without her having to say, Mummy, I'm going to open up the curtains for you so that you can help me get ready. And to have a 3-year-old do that is heartbreaking. And I don't have to do that anymore because I get the sleep that I need. I get the medication is helping me to eat, to give me the strength to do the things with her that I want to do for however long I've got.
It's beautiful. It's fantastic that it's given that back to you as well. I can tell from just your face how much that means to you to have that difference in your life. And
Yep.
it's also really interesting to have that different point of view from the two different clinicians that you spoke to, and how difficult to deal with one that's sort of really shutting the door on you and saying this is it and this is all I can do, and then find another who's happy to be more open-minded about things. And well, fantastic that we see some patients who are more open-minded.
And ironically, I now have 5 doctors who are supporting me, and all 5 of them are aware, and all 5 of them are 100% on board with it.
Fantastic. Well, that's brilliant too, and I guess that's sort of it's not that one doctor who was happy is just a sort of abnormality or anything like that. It's you've actually found a few doctors that are convinced that this is the right thing for you, and they're supportive of what you're doing as well. That's wonderful to hear. And I'd be interested to hear from Sophie about this a little bit, just talking about clinicians being sort of supportive and not supportive. Do you think it's a matter of them being more open-minded and just sort of seeing whether this can help patients, or do you think it's that they actually need to be educated formally? What do you think we need to do to sort of prevent patients from coming up against that wall and that barrier of that first clinician?
I think it's a really good question. I think it's a combination of both of those things. I mean, it has to come from a desire to look for something different and to have the open-mindedness, especially at the level of the doctors that Terry would have been dealing with. And it makes me really sad to hear that it's not the first time I've heard that for patients to have a doctor say, if you take this, I will not see you anymore. So it does make me sad because I feel like it's a poor representation of what the core of medicine is as a practice. However, I do understand that those doctors will have been not ever heard about cannabis medicines other than in the capacity of substance of misuse. You know, my background as an A&E nurse, previous to being an ICU nurse, was you would do an assessment of someone as they came in, and cannabis use would be labelled under substance misuse, and then you would take it no further, depending on whether or not you felt they needed to go to drug liaison team or not. And I think this is the thing, especially at the level of consultants, who are unfortunately the only people who are able to prescribe at the moment. It's a big step, I think, for consultants psychologically to acknowledge that cannabis medicines have potential, because they have been in their role is to know the answer to everything all the time in any environment. They will always be the most senior person in a crisis, right? So for them to be able to step back and go, I didn't know about this, but I'm certainly willing to find out with you as my patient, is a big mental step for them. I think it is the more educational courses and webinars and live events that are happening across the UK are certainly giving clinicians confidence to explore it. But I think the reality is that without formal approval from organisations like the International Association for Study of Pain, or the GMC, or the NMC, or NICE. NICE is a big one, in order to reassure them that this is something they should explore, or that they will be educated in. I mean, I was as a nurse at the same time as being an advocate for this particular field. I certainly faced that challenge, which was, how much do I shout about this? How much do I talk to my colleagues about it? Because it's about how much your pin is at risk. And I know that doctors talk about that a lot. And I remember an advocate at the time saying you would be able to help more people as your role as a qualified nurse than purely like dedicating yourself to cannabis. And thankfully, my two roles have combined into the role that I have now. But I think that is a really big barrier for a lot of clinicians to get over, and to not. And I think that is key. So I'm thrilled to hear that those 5 consultants are very, very supportive. So I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, it's really reassuring to hear. I want to talk a bit more about the sort of stigma that we as patients receive about this particular subject. I want to talk to Jess a little bit. I know that you're a parent, you're a mother to how many children do you have, Jess?
Got 5 kids.
5 kids, fantastic. And I'd love to hear a little bit about whether or not you're sort of communicating and talking about the medicine to other parents. Is that a conversation that comes up at the school gates? I'm picturing, maybe I'm misunderstanding. How does it work for you?
What I would say is that inevitably there are lots of jokes sort of made at parties. Oh, Jess, can't you get your medicine out? You know, kind of thing, by friends of mine, and they don't say it in a horrible way. They're just kind of joshing with me. However, I would say that certainly at my daughter's schools, because they're still little, my little ones, there are many parents I would not share it with, because they would kind of give you a funny look, or that's that kind of hippie weird mum, and there are definitely misconceptions that people would have, and it's not something that I would mention to certain people. Though at the same time, I do want to be proud about it. It's just, and if I perceive that somebody was going to be open about it, I want to talk about it, because obviously it's made a very big difference to me. And actually, when I meet people in chronic pain, I sort of feel an obligation actually to tell them about it, because I think once it helps you, you become somewhat evangelistic about it. You want to share this with people. However, yeah, there are certainly headmistresses of kids' schools, the school nurse, people like that. Under no circumstances would I bring it up.
And you've not had any sort of run-ins with teachers or anything like that? I know I spoke to someone recently who said that their child had been doing drug education at school, and they've been told cannabis was illegal, and they said, my daddy has actually got a prescription for cannabis, and the teacher said, no, that doesn't happen. And then I think the whole conversation happened in a sort of parents' evening where I think the parent just clarified that was the case, and that it was just for the sort of teachers' knowledge education. But
do you know what? Thankfully, I've not had to face a situation like that at school. However, I've got some quite stroppy teenage kids, and it's come up in arguments where I'm telling them off, or they'll throw it back in my face. Oh well, mummy, you use marijuana, And even though I've explained to them very well that this is actually a medicine that I'm using, there is still that general perception that medical cannabis is something to do with recreational marijuana. It's something to do with getting stoned. And that's just something that we have to educate people about, and, tell people about. And that's the only way we will ever get the message across.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we need to have a line drawn where it's not that it's not necessarily an enjoyable thing to consume, even if you're using it medically, but it's that there's a specific reason you are using this medication. It's not just for laughs, I suppose. Really interesting to talk to you, Mark, as well. I know that in your role, you're in the public eye quite a bit as well in your job. Is it something that you speak about with your colleagues at all? Is it something that you're open about there? And maybe you can speak to what you do for a living a little bit as well.
Yeah, certainly. Well, first of all, I'm a politician in Guernsey. I'm also a director of the Channel Islands' largest licensed cannabis company, and that's common knowledge. So my peers, and I think everybody in the community, is pretty much aware that I'm a supporter of medicinal cannabis. As regards to my personal prescription, it's not information that I've shared before with colleagues. I've got two politicians they're very good friends of mine are aware, because we have kind of general conversations about personal life as well. I have to admit, if I was asked by any of my colleagues in the States Assembly, I would be honest about it. I've got nothing to hide. I sit on the Committee for Health and Social Care. my import license is issued by the chief pharmacist every month, so she must know that I'm medicinal cannabis because she signs my import license. Whether that information has probably got around to the rest of the senior staff team, I have no idea. When anything comes to the committee in regards to cannabis, I have to recuse myself, obviously because of my business connections. I have to admit, I did challenge yesterday. We had the admin from the Guernsey medical cannabis patients Facebook group into the committee to discuss some of the issues they were having with import licenses, etc. And I was asked to stand out of that meeting. I did challenge that, and I'm going to challenge that going forward because there was no way I could stand to benefit from that. And also, I'm kind of, as a politician, I'm pretty much the subject matter expert here. So if there's anybody that can, and I'm engaging with these people through this Facebook site page and know their problems. So I'm best placed to be able to articulate that back to the rest of my committee. So hopefully we can get that tidied up going forwards. But yeah, certainly there's a massive stigma. When I came into politics in 2016, it was difficult to speak to anybody about the word cannabis, any of my peers at the time. Now we're debating it. Now we're talking about it all the time. We've just, as a government, we're just in the process of signing an MOU with the UK Home Office, so we can now issue our own medicinal licenses to cultivate and process medicinal cannabis on Guernsey to supply the UK market and further afield in Europe. So Guernsey is starting to wake up. The politicians are certainly starting to understand when they see that the benefits, because I'm not quite sure if you guys are aware, but Guernsey historically is a growing island nation, as in we used to grow tomatoes, we used to grow flowers. I think something like 17% of our island was covered in glass back in the 60s. So that just goes to show you how important it was to us. So we have a lot of this legacy infrastructure still here. We have, I think there's the last count in 2016, there was 199 acres of redundant glass in Guernsey, and only 53 acres were put into commercial use. Now, our company, the House of Green, what we've done is we've set up a cooperative. So we've got a central extraction system, an extraction lab and facility. We have our own, we've got a dozen acres of our own glass, but we work with smaller partner growers. So they can grow their own products and we will buy the product off of them because they are not going to be able to afford to set up all the millions it costs, you know. So we're starting to build a growing horticultural industry back into Guernsey by using the infrastructure that you already have here and by using the knowledge, the growing knowledge that we've got. There was a couple of growers from out in the sticks that grew a CBD last season, and our guys from the States that came over, they tested it and they said this is the best, the highest producing CBD out from this strain that we've ever seen, because we've got a good climate here, we've got great soil, great greenhouses, plus we have the expertise. So Guernsey, I think, is a step ahead of the UK in that respect. We're a lot smaller community of only 65,000 people, and news gets across really quick. And I've been banging on in the media over the last 5 years for us to be examining medical cannabis more, not just as an industry, but opening it up so people like us can get the health benefits from it. And some of the politicians I was speaking with in 2016 that wouldn't even have a conversation with me about it, one lady phoned me up a couple of months ago, was telling me a greenhouse that was available that she thought could be put back to use. Understood that stigma is just been so damaging and so harmful, and it doesn't do anybody any good whatsoever. But it's so hard to shift. It's really difficult. Certainly for a nation such as the size of the UK, it's going to be more of a challenge for you guys. But I think this is where jurisdictions like us, we're part of the British Isles, we're part of the Common Travel Area. If we can take the lead and that we can show that we're a progressive nation and we can demonstrate the public health benefits that we would see, I think then the UK would sit up and take a bit more notice.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I've been following the progress in Guernsey with a lot of interest. Actually managed to get out there and visit not long before the law changed, and I saw, like you say, many disused greenhouses all over the place. There's a huge amount of potential there, as you say. It's fantastic to hear that things are moving forward at quite a rapid pace by the sound of things. You say ahead of the UK, and I'm certainly not disagreeing with you. And it's that small community aspect, isn't it, that enables things to, word of mouth essentially moves much faster, and a general understanding moves much faster. Whereas in the UK, we have obviously a 60 million big numbers of the general public, and a lot of work to be done in terms of removing that stigma and that sort of misunderstanding that we've spoken about there. So I do want to talk a little bit more to sort of what it's like being a patient at one of these clinics. Perhaps we can talk, I'm going to go back to Terry if that's all right. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about sort of how long it took you to sort of find the right medicines for you. Was that a sort of an immediate process? You just got a prescription and it happened overnight, or was it a bit more of a try one thing and then try another? I know that, you know, from my experience, cannabis medicines are very personal. So did it take time to find the right thing for you?
I'm going to be completely honest. Mine was right from day one. I think because I tried marijuana and I tried CBD oil, and it was a super high strength one. And I'd given specific details to Sophie and to Dr. Ordman of these were my issues. These were the times that I feel sick. These are the medications that I'm on. This is how I feel at certain parts during the day. I've been on the same medication now since day one, and it still works as well for me now as it did back then. And I haven't upped my dose. I haven't changed it. I still do exactly the same each time I use it, and it still works for me. And funnily enough, I was saying to Sophie, I came out of hospital on Tuesday, and they'd advised me because of the amount of I'd had morphine and Zopiclone and something else that was in a tube that was horrific, all over the space of 6 days, along with the general anaesthetic and liquid paracetamol. And they said to me, when you get out of hospital for 4 days, just don't do anything else because you're still going to have a lot of in your body. And I said to Sophie, actually, last night, because I didn't take anything, I was awake all night. And I feel very tired today. I have the anxiety today. And I know at this present moment in time, they have removed all 15 tumours. And at this present moment, I'm okay. But last night and today, I haven't been able to take anything. And the anxiety levels, I should be over the moon. But actually, the anxiety levels that I'm feeling, because I haven't had any sleep, and because of the amount of medication that I was on, I was so ill last night because my body was removing all of that horrible medication that I've had in me for the 6 days, that I said to Sophie, the difference is remarkable. And I've been taking it for granted because I've been using it every day since November, end of November last year, that actually not being able to take it for the past 3 weeks while I've had the 2 surgeries, I've really noticed it straight away, that the anxiety is kicking in, the lack of sleep, the loss of appetite. And I mean, Sophie said earlier on the video call, you can see that you've lost weight. It's because I have no appetite at all. And it's little things like that that then make you, when you're not functioning because you've not had sleep, you're not eating, you make silly mistakes, you make stupid decisions, you can't concentrate properly, and you snap at people for the smallest of things that you wouldn't ordinarily do, that all add up to make things into something so much worse than it is, just by taking that medicine. And it's so, you forget actually that you take it for granted. It's almost like you brush your teeth every day. You take that for granted. You get up in the morning and you brush your teeth, and you go to bed and you brush your teeth. It's that repeat pattern of when you stop doing it that you actually realize the benefit that it has, and actually the medication that you've been taking over the past 3 weeks because of these 2 surgeries, how sick it makes you, and how poorly you feel, and how tired and exhausted you feel from this medication for 3 weeks. So imagine how I would feel after I've been on all this other medication, if I'd have been taking all the other medication on top of that, imagine how awful I would be feeling right now.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it? And it's really interesting that you've had this sort of gap of not using the cannabis medicines, and you've immediately seen such a sort of downturn in terms of your sleep, and then of course your mood that's impacted. And I think it's something that as a patient myself, I obviously it sort of is very obvious, I think, when you've lived with it, any sort of illness for any number of weeks or months or years, you realise the impact that a good night's sleep can have, and appetite too. And I think it's that speaks to that holistic element of what these medicines are doing for patients, where getting a good 3 meals a day and a good night's sleep can make a huge difference to your quality of life in general, and that's sort of your mood as well as your symptoms.
And that is, it's not just the physical, it's the mental side of it as well. And that is what people don't understand. It's, if you're in pain, how that affects you mentally is actually worse than the pain, I think, a lot of the time, because you then end up in this spiral that you can't get yourself out of.
Is that something you've experienced, Jess, in terms of your mental health? Have you seen an improvement there, or a reduction in stress, an improvement in sleep, perhaps? Is there more than just the pain relief for you, or is it very straightforward?
I couldn't agree more with what's been said. Firstly, the big thing was sleep, because I always used to wake up with a numb left side and pins and needles down my arm from nerve pain during the night. That would wake me up around 2 a.m. And then once I was awake, I found it very difficult to go back to sleep. And I think then if you're trying to operate during the day, you are tired and ratty. And that in itself, when you're feeling tired and ratty, it's as if your skin is that much thinner to feeling the pain. And then when you do feel pain as a mum, believe me, all I wanted to do was get away from my kids. I mean, really, I just wanted to go upstairs, lie on my bed and shut the door. I didn't want to interact, because if you are in pain, you're so bloody grumpy that you really you really miss out on lovely, joyful moments of interaction with your children. And what I have found, I mean, it did take me a little while to find exactly the right kind of dosage of what worked for me. And I have to say, I tried vaping flower, it didn't work. And now I microdose oil it in a mixture of THC and CBD in the morning and at lunchtime. And then I take a small amount of pure THC oil at night, which gets me through the night and gives me sleep. And then the mixture during the day, the CBD helps kind of with the physical pain. So it took me a little while to get there, but yes, I did find the right balance. And I must say, it's very important to get on well with your doctor and be able to have a dialogue, because it's really a process of working out between the two of you what works. Because when you go to get a medicinal cannabis prescription, it's not like getting an antibiotic prescription where they can weigh you and then they look in that, I can't remember what it's named, that big drugs book GPs have on their desk, and they can work out how much to give you. To a certain extent, it's a trial and error process of suck and see what works for you, and then report back to your doctor.
Yeah, I certainly can profess to that myself. And before we move on to you, Mark, I'd be interested. You mentioned flowers there, Jess, and that you didn't get on with them. Can you tell us, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what happened there and how that conversation then went with your doctor, perhaps?
Sorry, guys. Can I just? I'm going to have to step out for a couple of minutes. Apologies. So I'll be back in as soon as I can. Okay.
Not a problem, Mark. We'll catch you in a minute.
Shall I continue? Or?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Sorry, Mark's clearly on some important political business over in Guernsey there. So yeah, Jess, let's hear a little bit about that and about your sort of experience with flowers, and then the conversation.
I have never been a recreational cannabis user, and I think my personality type, I very much like to be in control, and I felt with the oil, I had no kind of high or stone side effect from it whatsoever. And I don't know, when I tried the flower, I don't know if this is what people would describe being stoned, because I would imagine that would be pleasurable. To me, I didn't really like flower because I would say it just made my my thought process a bit distracted, and I felt a bit kind of separate. I don't know how to describe it. I just felt, gosh, I don't feel quite normal, and I'd like this to stop now.
You feel a bit outside yourself.
Yes, outside myself. That's exactly it. Or like,
well, I don't like it either.
I was able to have a conversation with myself in quite a weird way, and I was like, no, I don't really like this very much, but I did like the oil, and that was perfect for me.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think it makes an interesting point where I think, you know, the idea about cannabis being pleasurable is sort of the understanding, but I think for a lot of people it isn't. I think there's quite a few people who try it for whatever reason and simply don't get on with it, particularly when it's inhaled. And I know that, you know, from the chemists and the biologists that I work with, that's due to a very high dose very quickly, whereas with oils you can have that sort of balance throughout the day, can't you? And it's interesting that you had that experience and didn't get on with it initially, but then with the oils, it must be more tolerable just for you personally.
Yeah, and also, but it was great because I've got my little pipette and I can take 0.1, no, sorry, not, I don't, yeah, that is 0.1 that I would take. So, I could increase it maybe to 0.2, but I would never find myself in a situation where I was like, I really don't like this feeling and I wanted to stop. I've never experienced that with the oil. I've just found it to be purely helpful.
I have the same. Actually, I'm not good. And during the day, obviously, it's minimal THC, and of an evening, it's slightly more to help me sleep. And I, like you, Jess, I've found the same, that actually during the day, I don't notice any difference at all, apart from the fact that I don't feel anxious, I don't feel sick, I want to eat, and overnight I'm sleeping. And I'm happy with that. That works for me. And I know that vaping works for a lot of people, but that it wasn't for me. I didn't like doing that either.
I think it's quite a common experience, I think, from particularly people who are, I'm not to say new to cannabis, but there just seems to be a divide, doesn't there, between people who can tolerate any dose and people who want to get that dose exactly correct. And I think that with the oils, you have that slight more control over exactly how much you're consuming. So that's really interesting. Be interesting to hear from you, Mark, a little bit about how long it took you to find the right medicine for you and how that journey went, and whether it took some time and discussions with the doctor before you cracked the code, so to speak.
Not at all. My first prescription pretty much hit the nail on the head. After talking it through with my consultant, Dr. Armadi, I kind of had in my mind what the kind of medication I was looking for. Clearly, I needed something that was going to help me sleep for the evening, and we didn't want that for the daytime, etc., etc. When it came down to different strains and stuff like that, I mean, I'm not an expert, even though I'm a director of a cannabis company. There's other people that do that. Dr. Armadi kind of put my mind at rest. He suggested the two different flowers for me to vape. I personally, I've not tried the oils. I know a friend of mine is on oils. He's got respiratory problems. That's why he didn't even bother going down the vaping road. It works really well for him. I was lucky, and talking about THC levels, my sativa, daytime sativa, is 22% THC, and I can focus easily with that 22% THC. But conversely, the indica for the evening is 20% THC, and that will put me to sleep. So it's not just all about the THC levels, it's also the terpene profile. The terpene profiles are very, very important when it comes to the effect that each strain can have. And I'm learning a lot about that, and I'm getting educated by our head grower when it comes to terpene profiles, because I talk in indica and sativa and he just looks down at me completely. But because that just demonstrates there's so much more to learn about this plant, and there's so many more benefits we can harness if we just keep on, pumping our resources into R&D. I think we can that there will be some amazing things to come out of this plant. But getting back to my journey, my the levels of my prescription, I predicted, we discussed about it, we tried it. I think I've just altered my levels on my indica for the evening, but the sativas remain the same. So I'm happy. I'm totally happy with the position I'm in now. I've got my background, personal background is I was in construction for quite many years. Back in 2007, I had an argument with a circular saw and cut my thumb off, which I had to be thrown to Salisbury for them to sew it all back on and patch my hand up. A few years before that, I'd broken my scaphoid in the same hand twice and had a pin in it. So I've suffered since then with really, really bad pain in my left hand and my left wrist. So I never really knew if it was coming from the trauma from the surgery or from the scaphoid, because it used to travel up and down my arm. I knew cannabis worked because I tried it. But I mean, I'm a politician. I can't go down the local estate and start buying cannabis off of somebody, you know, because it's going to completely ruin my life. So this is why I was keen to search out, because I'd be sat at home with a tea towel on a radiator and my arm on the radiator trying to get some heat through it to stop the pain. I couldn't take cocodamol because I couldn't go to the toilet. Or Remorph, I tried after surgery again. I mean, they just completely disagreed with me. And who I respect is a doctor in his own right, but also has that cannabis background, was a breath of fresh air, because you can have a proper conversation and you both know what you're talking about. Saying that, my new GP, Dr. King in Guernsey, who's taken over, he's your stereotypical old school doctor with a tweed jacket and the pads on the elbows and stuff like that. But he's been great, and he links up with Dr. Al-Mahdi, and they keep in contact, so they both know, because they're both jointly, even though I'm not on any medication or treatment in Guernsey, I'm in medication with Dr. Al-Mahdi, I still like to have my GP keeping an eye on things, and I think it's wise, certainly when we're based in an offshore jurisdiction like we are, that we have that on-island knowledge of your medical background. But my journey so far, and touch wood, I can't see anything apart from if the supply runs out, everything should be fine.
I certainly hope that doesn't happen. Thank you so much. That's really interesting. Sophie, perhaps you can give us some insights from the sort of clinician's point of view on how that process works, because I know, and we've had 3 patients here say that actually it was very quick to find the right medicine for them, but I know from others that I've spoken to, it's not always so straightforward and immediate to find the right thing, and sometimes takes some experimenting. How does it work from a sort of clinical point of view? How are you making these decisions, and how, what are you assessing in order to make them?
So I think primarily it's about listening. That in terms of finding the right medication or the right prescription, it's a lot to do with, we tend to get 2 groups of patients, and interestingly, you guys represent both sides quite well, which is there are some people who've never even considered cannabis, and they've heard that it might help, or even someone has recommended, and they come to us and they say, like, I honestly don't know anything about it. What would you recommend, or what would you do based on the symptoms that I'm experiencing? Then we have patients who have been using cannabis sourced illicitly for maybe decades, and they know exactly what they want. And like Mark said, I came with an idea of what kind of thing would help. And again, and like that relationship with your doctor is about having that conversation, and through that conversation, that's how you'll find your prescription. So with patients who are very knowledgeable already, it's about demonstrating that understanding of the medications that we have available to prescribe, and how we, exactly as Mark talks about, minor cannabinoids and terpenes as well, and that it's not purely to do with THC and CBD, and that you are trying to identify the symptoms that you're trying to manage, and then matching the medication or the profile of the flower medication, for example, to those symptoms. The other thing about prescribing any medication, but particularly with cannabis, I think, is taking someone's lifestyle seriously and taking that person's whole life into consideration. We've got people who work in construction, we've got people who are mums, people who are they drive ships, for God's sake. Like we have to take into consideration what those patients want their life to be like, and try and encourage their quality of life, like try and get the prescription right to match the quality of life that they're after. I think a lot of things that I talk about with patients when we talk for the first time is, what are your goals? What are your goals for your treatment? What is it that you want to be able to manage? And it might be symptoms, but it might be things like, you know, I want to be able to go and watch my daughter's ballet recital, you know, but I can't sit in those chairs, or I want to be able to play with my kids, or I want to be able to go back to physio, or I want to go back to work. And it's that kind of thing, that patient-led treatment in a real way that is part of how you, like, is a significant part of how you find the right prescription. And like you say, you know, you see your doctor every month, but at Integro, I'm available on the phone for people to call me and say, you know, listen, Soph, like, I've tried this medication. I know we were trialing it for sleep, but it's not necessarily working for me. Next time, could we look at a different medication for that symptom? And it's just about having that constant conversation. You know, like Jess said, it's about a dialogue. And if you have someone you can have that constant conversation with, it just gives a little bit of reassurance. You know, oh, someone is listening to me. And I think when we did advocacy, and in my own hospital nursing, having clinicians that listen to you seems to be the key, one of the major key factors of being a good comprehensive care team. So that tends to be part, like, the decision making process, that in order to find patients the right prescription. Excuse me.
That's really interesting and really fascinating to hear how much you take into consideration the very different aspects of that patient's life and lifestyle and the goals they want to make as well. I think that's really key. I know as a patient, that's something that I'm very focused on. It's always about, what do I want to get done today, this week, this month, this year, and how am I going to achieve that, and what tools do I have in order to do that? And I suppose it's a similar thing from the clinician's point of view. What tools do I have to help patients? I'm aware we're sort of coming to the end of the time that we have for this particular part of the expo, but it'd be really interesting to get some final thoughts from all of you, and particularly we're speaking to perhaps the patients who might be watching, or perhaps those who are skeptical of medical cannabis who also might be in the audience today. I'm actually going to start. I'm going to go straight back to you, Sophie, just because I want to get some of the patients' final thoughts last. I hope you won't be offended. But yeah, as a clinician, perhaps you can speak to, if there are any other clinicians that are watching this, what would you like their sort of main takeaway to be from this panel?
Probably very similar to the comment that I just made, which is listen to your patients. Listen, if they're using it illicitly already and they say this is helping me, listen to that. Have a conversation about that. Don't be afraid to have the conversation. There's nothing is at risk at having a conversation. So that is probably what would be my key takeaway for clinicians in terms of cannabis medicines.
Thank you. And I'm going to move on to Mark, if you will, and perhaps we can give a bit of maybe a politician's spin on it. If there's anybody working in government who's watching, what would you like them to hear? But also for patients as well, what would you like the sort of main takeaway to be from this?
I'd just like medicinal cannabis to be accepted the same as any other medication. I think the problem that we've got in Guernsey, even medicinal cannabis patients tend to see it a bit differently because others see it a bit differently. We've had people saying, if you get prescribed medicinal cannabis, people will take that, the police will take your driving license off of you. I just want to reassure people that it's a prescription medication, the same as any other prescription medication, and everybody has got to understand that. As soon as everybody understands that your prescription you're getting from your cannabis pharmacy is identical in how it should be perceived, and how you should approach it, because medicinal cannabis is a prescription. You don't divert any prescription medication. You don't divert your medicinal cannabis, exactly the same. So I just want the important thing I want everybody to take away from it, and that's potential patients, current patients, and government, is treat it identical to any other prescription medication, and then we're starting to get somewhere.
I really like that. Normalizing it is so important for us to remove that stigma and to really embrace it in clinical circles and also patient circles as well. So couldn't agree more on that. I'm going to go to Jess now, if that's okay.
Yeah, the thing that I'd really like to emphasise is that, other than trying the vaping, which didn't agree with me, the oils have absolutely no side effects. and they've allowed me to stop taking, you know, on a bad day, it would have probably been up to 12 painkillers a day. You know, I would double up the dose in the morning, lunchtime, and then evening. So anything that can allow me to stop doing that can only be a good thing. And I mean, as I say, it's utterly negligible, the side effects that I have experienced. There have been none. I found it to be a purely helpful drug. And I would just really urge GPs to get better educated about this, because I think it would be massively helpful for many of the patients that they're seeing in their clinics. And anything that makes you stop taking unnecessary painkillers, taking unnecessary drugs, can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I think you touched on GPs there, and we could have a conversation. We'd have a whole nother panel on what needs to be done to engage GPs and educate clinicians. And I suppose it's if I was going to add my 2 cents there really briefly before we finish with Terry's final thoughts, is that these medicines are, by the fact that they are unlicensed medicines, they're there for being prescribed when all the other painkillers haven't been working, when the antidepressants haven't been working. And it's the last thing to consider. It's the, for those patients that you simply have, I don't want to say given up on, but you come to the end of the road of what you might consider for them. This is another thing that you can consider that might help these individuals, and to just be open-minded to that. So that's just my little 2 cents there coming into the panel there. But sorry, yeah. Just to say something.
There is one thing I'd like to add. It was just that when I was seeing Dr. Orban, when I was first seeing him, and I told him how many painkillers I was taking, he said, "Do you have any idea what that's doing to you? I think it's your kidneys, or Sophie, correct me. What is it that you?" Because I was taking dihydrocodone, so it's a mixture of Nurofen and caffeine and all sorts of things. He said, "Do you understand how incredibly bad? Is it your kidneys or your liver that it affects?"
I mean, it's likely to be both, because they're both organs.
Yeah, he said, primary focus. 3 times a day, you're taking double the amount in the box, and that, he said, if you continue to do this long term, you were going to have, it's going to have a horrible effect upon your body. And the cannabis medicines allowed me to stop doing that. So I'm very grateful for him for putting me on the right road, and I'm very grateful for Integro as a clinic, that I was able to go there and to get this medicine, which has really helped me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jess. And Terry, your final thoughts and what you'd like those watching to take away from this panel.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what you said, actually, Alex, about that I did it myself. I was faced with last resort. And I think we need to change our mindset. It shouldn't be seen as a last resort. It should be seen as a natural alternative. And that's the thing that we're missing. The gabapentin, the diazepam, the dihydrocodone, the morphine, the Oromorph, all these other drugs, none of them are natural. The damage that they're doing to you emotionally and physically so far outweighs what cannabis medicine does. And I think we, as a world, not just as a nation, need to change it to not being a last resort medication. We need to train doctors, nurses, every single human being to say that this is acceptable, this is normal. You should be able to reach for your cannabis medicine in the same way that you do your Nurofen. Your Nurofen, you take too much Nurofen, you're going to know about it. Whereas cannabis doesn't do any of that. It doesn't cause you any of that. And you use it in the right way, you're only going to do yourself better, not harm. And that's the thing for me. It shouldn't be seen as a last resort. And we really need to change how everybody perceives it to stop being a last resort medication.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. And what you're saying there with the comparison with Nurofen, it's the toxicity of these medications in comparison. I mean, you could overdose. You could take your whole prescription of cannabis in a day, and the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you'll probably fall asleep. You might have some mild paranoia, some side effects to that sort of side of things, but you're not going to end up in A&E having your stomach pumped as you would if you took a whole box of Nurofen. And I think that's so important to point out to everybody watching. That it's the safety profile of these medicines, particularly, that makes them such a a useful tool for clinicians to have in their toolbox. And I really couldn't agree with you more there. So I just want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. Thank you to Terry, to Mark, to Jess, and to Sophie for joining us. And thank you for sharing your experiences with us. It's been really insightful and fascinating to hear from you all. I want to thank everyone else for watching. And if you're interested to learn more about the Integro clinics, you can find them at www.integroclinics.com. If you're a patient or maybe you're a clinician and you're interested to learn more about how this whole system works, then you can get in touch with them there. If you're a nurse, you can contact CPAS, and you probably end up speaking to Sophie if you want to engage more with the medical cannabis space. And if patients need any further support, they can find it from PLE, that's Patient-Led Engagement and Advocacy, I think it stands for, and that's plecommunity.org.uk. So that's just us rounding off today, CBD Live Europe 2021. And thanks so much for all our panelists again, and thank you all for watching.
Thank you.